Monica Ellison wasn't just any woman walking into that small-town bank. She was a powerhouse. For years, she had built her reputation brick by brick, starting from humble beginnings and rising to become the CEO of Ellison Global Holdings, a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate with investments in finance, real estate, and technology. Under her leadership, the company had not only expanded across states, but had also grown into one of the largest Black-owned enterprises in the country. Despite her success, Monica had never lost touch with her values. She believed in humility, respect, and remembering where she came from. She often said that her mother taught her two rules to live by: always stand tall, and never let anyone strip away your dignity. Those lessons fueled her drive through late nights at law school, tough negotiations in boardrooms, and now, as she oversaw a pending $7 billion partnership deal with a major regional bank. This deal was supposed to be historic. It wasn't just about numbers. It was about creating opportunities for underserved communities. Monica envisioned new financial programs for minority-owned businesses, expanded credit access for first-time homeowners, and a nationwide signal that true diversity could exist at the highest levels of finance. But before finalizing anything, she decided to make a discreet visit to one of the bank's smaller branches. To Monica, numbers on paper meant little if the people behind them weren't genuine. She wanted to see how employees treated everyday customers, especially those who didn't walk in wearing expensive suits or carrying prestige in their pockets. On a warm afternoon, she entered the branch dressed simply: jeans, a blouse, and her natural hair tied back. She carried her ID and a small portfolio, planning only to ask a few routine questions. To the staff, she looked like any ordinary woman. And that was exactly what Monica intended. The lobby was modest but busy. Customers waited in line, chatting quietly, while tellers worked behind the counter. Monica took her place patiently, observing how transactions were handled. She noticed small things: how one teller smiled warmly at an older couple, how another gave curt answers to a young man in work boots. Her instincts sharpened. Finally, it was her turn. She approached the counter with a polite smile, sliding her ID and paperwork across the desk. "Good afternoon," she said. "I'd like to discuss a few account options." The teller barely glanced at her before frowning. His tone was clipped, skeptical, as though her very presence annoyed him. Monica felt the shift immediately, the change in body language, the dismissive look. She had been in countless boardrooms where men twice her age underestimated her. But here, in this quiet branch, it wasn't sexism she sensed. It was something uglier. What happened next would confirm her suspicions, and set in motion consequences the bank would never forget. The moment Monica handed over her ID, she noticed the teller's eyes narrow. He picked it up, held it between two fingers as though it were contaminated, and examined it far longer than necessary. "Is this even yours?" he asked flatly, his voice carrying enough volume for people in line to hear. Monica kept her composure. "Yes, that's my government-issued identification," she replied calmly, though a ripple of irritation stirred inside her. The teller leaned back, crossing his arms. "Doesn't look like you," he muttered. Then, with deliberate carelessness, he let the card fall to the floor instead of handing it back. It clattered on the tiles by Monica's feet. The room seemed to freeze. A few customers gasped quietly. Others pretended not to notice, but their eyes darted toward the counter. Monica felt her cheeks flush, not from shame, but from the sting of blatant disrespect. She bent down, picked up her ID with steady hands, and straightened her posture. Years of leadership had taught her one lesson above all: never let anger control the moment. And yet, the teller wasn't done. "I'll need more proof," he barked, glaring at her as though she were an intruder. "We don't just open accounts for anyone off the street, especially not when things don't add up." It wasn't the words alone. It was the emphasis, the tone, the weight of unspoken bias. The kind of prejudice Monica had seen her community battle for generations. Behind her, an elderly woman whispered, "Lord, that's not right." A young man muttered under his breath, shaking his head. But no one dared intervene. The silence spoke louder than the insults. Monica met the teller's eyes. "Excuse me?" she said evenly. "You heard me," he replied, chin lifted with arrogance. "If you can't prove you belong here, maybe you should try another bank." The cruelty was so casual, so dismissive, it stunned even the other staff members. One young clerk at the far end of the counter looked mortified but said nothing, too afraid to contradict a colleague. Monica felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She could have snapped back. She could have unleashed her authority then and there, but she didn't. Instead, she let the teller believe he'd won, that he had successfully diminished her. Because Monica knew something he didn't. He thought he was dealing with a powerless woman, someone he could humiliate and send away. What he didn't realize was that the very woman standing before him held the future of his entire bank in her hands. As Monica retrieved her documents, her silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. She already knew how this story would end, and it wouldn't be in his favor. Monica gathered her things slowly, her every movement deliberate. The teller thought he had dismissed her, but in reality, he had just written the ending to his own career. As she slipped her ID back into her wallet, Monica reached into her portfolio and pulled out a sleek black card, the kind reserved only for top executives. The teller's smug expression faltered when he saw the embossed gold letters. Ellison Global Holdings, Chief Executive Officer. She placed it on the counter with quiet authority. "Perhaps this will be sufficient identification," she said. The teller blinked, his confidence cracking. He glanced at the card, then back at her, clearly struggling to process what he was seeing. Around them, the bank lobby had gone silent. Customers craned their necks, whispering. Even the young clerk at the far end of the counter froze in place, wide-eyed. Monica leaned in slightly, her voice calm but laced with steel. "You didn't just question my identity. You insulted my dignity. And worse, you revealed how your institution treats people it assumes don't belong." The teller stammered, I didn't mean." But Monica raised a hand, cutting him off. "Intentions don't erase impact. I came here quietly as a customer. Instead, I was treated like an intruder. That tells me everything I need to know about whether this bank is a worthy partner." She slipped her CEO card back into the portfolio, then turned to leave. But before walking away, she stopped and addressed the room. Not just the teller, but everyone present. "My company was considering a multi-billion-dollar merger with this institution. I wanted to see how you treat people when you don't know who they are. Now I have my answer." A collective gasp swept through the lobby. The words landed like thunder. The teller's face drained of color. The manager, who had been listening from a nearby office, rushed out in a panic. "Ms. Ellison, wait. Please, there's been a misunderstanding." Monica gave him a cool, measured look. "There was no misunderstanding. There was clarity, and silence will be my response." She walked out of the branch, her heels clicking against the marble floor, leaving stunned employees and wide-eyed customers in her wake. That afternoon, she made a single phone call to her board of directors. "The deal is off," she said simply. No lengthy explanation was needed. Her reputation carried weight, and her silence spoke volumes. By the next morning, the entire upper management of the regional bank was in chaos. Calls went unanswered, emails piled up, and executives scrambled to figure out what had gone wrong. All they knew was that a $7 billion partnership, one that could have secured their future, had evaporated overnight. And it all traced back to one teller, one careless act, and one powerful woman who refused to be disrespected. The consequences hit the bank like a tidal wave. Within 24 hours of Monica's silent withdrawal, the partnership that executives had bragged about in press releases was dead. Investors panicked, board members demanded answers, and financial journalists dug for the story behind the sudden collapse. It didn't take long for the truth to leak. Employees from the branch began whispering about what had really happened, that the CEO of Ellison Global Holdings had been humiliated in broad daylight by a teller who assumed she didn't belong. By the time the details reached the media, the narrative was no longer about a failed deal. It was about arrogance, racism, and a bank's inability to uphold the very values it claimed to stand for. The stock price dipped almost overnight. Customers began closing accounts, unwilling to trust an institution whose own actions had cost it billions. Competitors swooped in, eager to absorb the fallout. For the teller who had sparked the disaster, suspension came quickly, followed by termination. But firing one man didn't undo the damage. The stain on the bank's reputation was permanent. Monica, however, moved forward without hesitation. She never called a press conference or issued a fiery statement. Instead, she focused on redirecting her company's resources into partnerships with banks and organizations that genuinely cared about equity and inclusion. Where one door had slammed shut, she opened 3 more. Her silence became its own form of power. The absence of a defensive speech or a dramatic retaliation allowed people to draw their own conclusions. And every conclusion favored her. She had responded with dignity, and that dignity had cost the bank $7 billion. Inside the community, the story grew into something larger than a business deal. People who had been in the branch that day told and retold what they'd seen. A woman calmly picking her ID up off the floor, refusing to be rattled, and ultimately walking away with more strength than anyone could measure. To many, Monica became a living reminder that respect is non-negotiable. The bank's executives, meanwhile, spent months trying to rebuild trust. They launched diversity initiatives, made hollow apologies, and quietly tried to court new investors. But the damage was done. Their failure became a case study, a lesson taught in finance and ethics classes alike. A single act of prejudice can destroy years of progress. One evening, weeks after the ordeal, Monica sat in her office overlooking the city lights. A colleague asked if she ever regretted not giving that teller a piece of her mind. Monica smiled faintly and shook her head. "Sometimes the strongest voice," she said, "is silence. Letting the world see who people really are speaks louder than anything I could have said." And with that, she turned back to her work, building futures that no amount of ignorance could ever tear down.